Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good morning for those of you on the West Coast and East Coast afternoon, as well as in India, very late at night. My name is Farah, and I'd like to welcome you to our program today through IMRC called Balancing Service Without Burnout. As you know, we'll talk further today into our program about why we are here today, and we have our guest speaker as well. This program is brought to you by IMRC, which stands for Indian Muslim Relief and Charities. IMRC is a nonprofit that began in 1981, and it began with the idea of providing service to India's Muslims and minorities across India. Our three main areas of service include education, emergency relief, food and shelter, as well as healthcare and medical and legal aid. Without further ado, I'd like to now introduce our guest speaker today. His name is Dr. Sheikh Omar Hosseini. He was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and has a BA in psychology and an MD degree from the University of Illinois. He's an academic hematopathologist and a molecular pathologist at one of the top cancer centers in the U.S., the Moffitt Cancer Center, and he's an associate professor in the Department of Oncological Sciences at the University of South Florida. He's published more than 90 abstracts, peer-reviewed publications, and book chapters, and has an interest in cancer genetics, machine learning, biomarker discovery. Sheikh Omar is also a religious scholar graduating from Darul Uloom Zakaria in South Africa at the top of his class and Hafiz of Quran. Sheikh Omar lectures at retreats, itikaf programs, universities, local and national conferences, and mosques throughout the U.S. and abroad on various Islamic topics, many of which can be found at pureway.org. He also teaches weekly online classes in Hadith, Islamic jurisprudence, and spirituality. He is head of the Makkiyah Institute, mashallah. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Sheikh Omar Hosseini.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina astafa amma ba'd. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. It's a distinct pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. I'm actually quite impressed with your dedication of showing up for this talk, even though it's quite late there in India, probably getting close to around 11 o'clock. I'm also very proud of the audience for the amazing work that you're involved in. It comes in narration that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Khairun nasi anfa'un nas," that the best of people are those who are most beneficial to others. So in this vein, you are the, as they would say, creme de la creme. Allahu Akbar. And this is something that we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, because it is only from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He chooses people for His work, and He chooses people to do the khidmah of the deen, and He chooses people to do khidmah of other individuals. Sometimes we think that we're the ones who show up for the job, but it's actually we've been recruited for that particular capacity. And it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're doing or how much you're doing, but just the fact that you're doing something for others is of great import. And this holds particular value in the modern day setting with the status quo of a social system that promulgates and is predicated on egocentricity, on selfishness, on entitlement. And while this milieu can range anywhere from the frank byproduct of hedonism to a revised understanding of a focus on the self, as they say, as seen in Ayn Rand's work of revisioning of a moral of selfishness, quote unquote. And just regardless, right? This is when you live in a background where the focus is all on me, to move to an area or a space where the focus is on we, that is laudable. And so as we move into the topic of today, one of the first take-home messages I wanted to share with the audience is that when you engage in this very praiseworthy, very lofty, and noble endeavor of ameliorating the human condition, really the first one to benefit from that work is not the recipient, but it is we ourselves. And this is something I want for you to etch in your mind. There's been a tremendous amount of research. If you look in modern times, whether it's layered at the New York School of Economics, Gilbert at Harvard, and others, on what it actually takes to become happy, and that's not really, or the science of happiness, and that's not really the topic of today. But I'm reminded of a particular TED talk that was given to people who give TED Talks, right? So this is sort of that pyramidal hierarchy where that one important talk for the people or the influencer of the influencers. And one of the things that sort of stands out in my mind when I think back to that talk is that when he was speaking to all of them, because the assumption here, these are people who are well seasoned, people who've seen life, people of experience, people of accomplishment, people of status. He says, well, we all know that the age-old adage that money doesn't buy happiness, holds true, and that the way that you really find happiness is by helping others, right? And this was a particular individual, who was in poverty himself, and then slowly grew into making a tremendous change in feeding others on the order of, I believe, millions. So it started small, very similar to the IMRC story. But that's what they say in Arabic, in al jabala min al husat, that even the mountain is made of pebbles. You got to start somewhere. But coming back and harkening back to that main concept, the first concept that I wanted to highlight today, that if you think about this in these terms, that it's about, this is something that benefits me, then it realigns the perspective about the work and the way that we're doing the work that we're doing. All the charity, all the sacrifice, all the sleepless hours, all the tears are not in fact for the recipient, but in fact they're for us. And so when we engage with the needy, with the poor, with the oppressed, with the marginalized, what we are in fact doing first is that we're giving our own life meaning. We're giving our own life purpose. And we're filling it with something meaningful, such that when we look back at our life, we can see it as a life that was lived in such a way that it was worth living. And contrast this with the life of the person who lives a cheap existence of women and wine. You have labor workers here in the US where they work hard the whole entire week, and then they party hard on the weekend and get drunk, and then they go and repeat the same thing their entire life. And it's like the hamster on a spinning wheel. They just keep on doing the same exact thing, watch the same exact shows until all of a sudden you find yourself that you're 70 and you're alone and you're in a nursing home and you're watching reruns of the same shows that you saw when you were 20 and you just don't know where your life went by. And when you look back, right, they say that the saddest word in any language is what if. And so people who live a life just about themselves, they are forced to face that stark reality of what if I had lived my life differently. But if you did live a life that was beneficial to others, it is much more likely that a person won't face that regret at the time where the regret is most poignant. And then if we understand this concept, that what we're doing is not for others, but is really for ourselves, that this is for you, then it becomes much easier to pace yourself. If, for example, if you enjoy cricket, if you enjoy basketball, that's something that you enjoy, something that you do for yourself, or any other hobby, painting, writing, so reading. You'll play basketball, but you won't push yourself to the point where you injure yourself. In the same way, when you're doing humanitarian work, when you're doing social work, when you're engaging in social activism, you got to play, right? And play hard. but you got to know your limits, and it's easy to know that because this is your game. And when a person is able to do that and make this shift, it also helps buffer a lot of the other factors that lead to burnout. So when you see people in cyclical poverty, when you see people making really poor choices, that you make these huge investments and then they basically flush it down the toilet. When you see lack of change, when you see corruption, when you see denial, and when you see problems that can't necessarily be solved. Because I think when people are young and somewhat utopian and green behind the ears, there's this feeling that we can conquer the world and that we can solve everything. But one of the things that you learn in life is that not every problem can be solved. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be attempted, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be immediately solved, at least in our lifetime. But you show up and you fight the good fight. And the reason that dealing with these factors that lead to burnout becomes more easily palatable, because you understand that the work that you are doing, that you need to do it, but it's not for them, it's actually for you, right? And that is the seminal pivotal point to keep in mind. And it's also particularly praiseworthy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen you for this particular work, because um, having this fikr for the ummah and having this worry and love and concern for the human condition, when you begin to genuinely care, what a person is actually doing is reflecting a seminal sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because he was a person who at the heart of matters cared. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about the Prophet ﷺ, he praised him in different ways. إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, for example, in Surah An-Nun, that indeed you are on a grand ethos. But when he spoke about why he was sent to humanity, what was his purpose? Why was he here? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ, and we did not send you, إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, except as a mercy to all of the worlds, for every single dimension, for every single existence. He did not talk about sending a legislator. He did not send him, this talk about sending him as an army general. He did not talk about him being sent as a teacher, even though he served many of these roles. He did not send him as a social activist. He did not send him as any of the things that sometimes come to our mind as a religious saint. And while all of those may be true of the person of the Prophet ﷺ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about why he sent him, he said, إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, you are mercy. And this thread, and what that means, and mercy implies love and softness and gentleness and care and compassion and caring, and all those things that drive us to do the things that we do. And so at the core of this work is that we have to stop seeing ourselves as workers or activists or humanitarians or philanthropists, but we have to see ourselves as agents of rahmah, as people of rahmah. And when you become a people of rahmah, that's when the change comes. And so this is the second major concept I wanted to drive home, is that the reason that we care is because it's a sunnah. The sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that he cared indiscriminately. When he was described about his generosity, it was said that his generosity is like the wind. And if anyone has seen the wind on an autumn day in the park, it touches everyone. It touches the child. It touches the elderly person sitting on the bench. It touches men. It touches women. It touches Muslims. It touches non-Muslims. It's indiscriminate, and such was the generosity of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is not just when it comes to money, because generosity, people can be generous with their emotions, with their time, with their care, with their being. And that's a lot more lofty than just being generous with your money. And so, first of all, we know that the Prophet ﷺ was extremely concerned about the situation of the believers. It comes in the Quran, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا أَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. That there has surely come to you from amongst yourselves a person that you can relate to. He's from amongst you, a messenger. And how is he described? He is a person who cares about the things that are important to you. If something bothers you, it bothers him. If something is problematic for you, then he makes it his problem. And this is one of the sifat that I particularly remember about one of my teachers. And he would tell me, just wait for that day to come when you can't go to sleep at night worrying about the condition or the problems of your community. And that's sort of the way he was. Anytime someone had a problem, he made it his own. It was like we were all his children. And we are all the spiritual children of the Prophet ﷺ, right? We're the children of this ummah. And it's also Azizun alayhi ma anittum. It's not just it's a really big deal. It's Aziz. Anything that concerns you, Harisun alaykum. And he is, when we talk about hirs, there's a connotation of greed. He's extremely intent upon you. He cares so much, and it's described with the same words which are referred to, which we refer to connotate greed. And he's Ra'uf, and he's gentle, and he's Rahim, and he's merciful. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. If you were a harsh person, if you were rough and tough, these people would run away from you. And this is sort of an aside, but people of religious types often sort of take on this persona that they're harsh and they're rigid. That's not religion. That's not religion, right? It's zealotry. So the way of the Prophet ﷺ was the way of love, and there's a way of compassion. And he had this feeling not only towards the believers, he had it towards the disbelievers. Look at when Abu Talib, when he was about to pass away, the Prophet ﷺ is at his bedside telling him to say La ilaha illallah. You have Abu Jahl at the bedside telling him, are you going to leave the way of your forefathers? And he's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then finally, at the last moment, he said, on the way, ala millati Abdul Muttalib, he said, on the way of Abdul Muttalib, and he passed away. And imagine how absolutely crushed the Prophet ﷺ was at that moment, and how betrayed he must have felt. That he poured his heart into his uncle, and his uncle actually had poured his heart into the Prophet ﷺ as well. But in that final moment, left there, and there's nothing that you can do. And then, the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't let that make him bitter. He didn't let that turn him into negativity. He didn't let that burn himself out. He said, I'm just going to pray to Allah and seek forgiveness for him until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells me not to. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually had to tell him not to. ما كان للمؤمنين أن يستغفروا للمشركين ولو كان أولي قربى من بعد ما تبين لهم أنهم أصحاب الجحيم. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually had to intervene. And this is a recurrent theme that you actually see in the Quran, that the Prophet ﷺ cared so much that sometimes it even exceeded the bounds. And when it exceeded the bounds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to intervene to return that sense of balance. And so that is also something that we all need to understand, that we have to temper our fervor, because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did this. He tempered the Prophet's desire for all of humanity to come to the deen. When he told him, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ, you don't guide whom you want, just because you desire so intensely for them to come to the deen. And the reason that he cared so intensely was not because of something for himself. It was not a game. It was not like a like fest. It was not a popularity contest. It was not trying to grow the numbers of your particular group. It was not sectarianism, but it was due to his deep love for humanity. It was about his character. And then the one thing that mattered the most in life, which is where you're going to end up in the hereafter, he put all his eggs in that basket, and he was all in that fight. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have to tell him that, look, you can't guide people just because you want. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. And from here that we understand another very important concept, that our job is just to do the work, and the results are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you can, render unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what is his, and when you take control of ourselves, what we have control over, then that's when we return a sense of a semblance of balance in the matter. And the care of the Prophet ﷺ, it extended even to his enemies. I mean, you find that it was a rainy night and there's a knock at Abu Jahl's house. And when the knock is there, he opens the door, and who does he find there at his door? It's the Prophet ﷺ. And why was he there? He said, look, the mood was right, the ambience was right. I thought maybe your heart would become soft and you would come to Islam. There was a person by the name of Abdullah ibn Ubay, and he is known as Ra'isul Munafiqeen. He wasn't just a hypocrite. He was the king of the hypocrites. And the amount of harm that he caused the Prophet ﷺ, the amount of sarcasm, the amount of undermining the mission of Islam, the amount of treason, libel, and sedition that he engaged in, it's like non-parallel. And what's that called? When he died, his son Abdullah ibn Abdullah, right? The person's name was Abdullah ibn Ubay, so his son's name was also Abdullah. He came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he asked him to give the Prophet ﷺ to give his shirt to shroud his father in it. And when he asked him, he actually gave it to him. And then he asked the Prophet ﷺ to pray the Salatul Janazah for his father. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he actually got up to pray the Janazah Salah. That's how much he cared, right? He cared even after the person had passed away and life was over. He didn't give up. He never got up. And when he was going to go and pray the Salatul Janazah, Umar radiallahu anhu, he gets up and he takes a hold he actually grabs the garment of the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, are you going to offer Salatul Janazah for him, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden you to offer the prayer for him? And then the Prophet ﷺ, he actually replied, telling him that, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me a choice. In tastaghfir lahum aw lam tastaghfir lahum, in tastaghfir lahum sab'ina marratin falan yaghfir Allah lahum. That ask forgiveness for them or don't ask forgiveness for them. Even if you ask forgiveness for them 70 times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never forgive them. So he said, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said 70 times that he won't forgive them. So I'll ask forgiveness for him more than 70 times, right? And then Umar radiallahu anh, he said, but he's a hypocrite. However, when the Prophet ﷺ went to offer the funeral Salatul Janazah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually revealed an ayah, and it وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ, that don't ever pray the Salatul Janazah, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, over any of them who has died, nor stand at his grave. And at that point, that was the point when he had that clear distinction that he actually take a step back, and he didn't. That's when he knew that he couldn't push beyond that boundary. Because kind of waqafan on the kitab Allah, when it came to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he followed it to the T. And then we have, for example, the very famous story of Ta'if. And I'm not going to go to the story. I mean, it's a story that everyone is very familiar with, where he went with great hopes of calling these people to Islam. And then he was actually routed out by the children even of the town that pelted him with stones so much so that he bled into his shoes. But one of the interesting things that people don't know is when Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, when he talks about his commentary of this incident, this is the way that he describes the Prophet. He said he was far from knowing anger, and he quickly showed compassion for things. He was the most loving of men towards other people. He was the most auspicious of men and did the most good to others. So that's the part I want to talk about. He did the most good to others and the most useful and beneficial to others. And so it comes back to this idea that the reason that we do this is that's what our religion is about. That is what our deen is about. And that is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And it was that relentless care that led to, in that same city, and I've been there, and I've been I've been to Ta'if, I've been to the graveyard of vineyards where he rested afterwards, and that is now a city of 1.2 million Muslims. And actually, and there's a difference of opinion, but that is one of the opinions is this is where Muhammad ibn Qasim al-Thaqafi, uh, who was actually born in Ta'if, and he was a commander in the Umayyad Caliphate, who under the reign of Al-Walid, which is around 700, he undertook the conquest of Sindh and Multan, and it was the first successful campaign against Sindh, which is now modern day Pakistan. So who knows? That one dua of the Prophet ﷺ, that relentless care, became a sabab, and who would have thought, for one of the most populous countries of Muslims in the entire world. And if you really want to understand and summarize the prophetic mission, the way that we do that is by understanding that his life, in a sentence, was service by day and worship by night. And the people who inherited from the Prophet ﷺ, the scholars are the inheritors of the Prophet, like Sheikh Hassan Ali Nadwi, rahimullah. He was of the great, the benefactor of the great madrasa Nadwatul Ulum. I was speaking to one of his students, who was an imam here in the United States, who actually spent time with him, and he was really a visionary, right, Sheikh Hassan. I told him, tell me something about him, because he's one of the great elders. And he said that, one time there was a person who came and he recited some poetry of Allama Iqbal about the situation of the Ummah. And after reciting the poetry, the person left, and one of the khadim of the Prophet, the khadim of the Sheikh, actually went to the person afterwards, and he's like, "Oh, good job." He said, "What do you mean? I just recited some poetry." He said, "Like, now Hazrat's not going to sleep the entire night, because you got him worried again." It was like this burning fire where you inherently cared, and it was hard to shut it off. And that was the sunnah. So service by day and worship by night, and that's a good segue to the third major concept that I wanted to share with the audience today. And to really understand this it's really, the concept is, how do you get the strength to have that unflinching, relentless care, concern, and keep on driving forward without burning out, without crashing, without just waning in the strength of that motivation. And to understand this, you have to understand the concept of potential and kinetic energy, right? We know, like, for example, the energy in a particular system is contained, and it can be transferred, between what we call potential energy and kinetic energy. And very simply put, for example, if I took a ball, or let me take a mouse here. So I take my mouse and I lift up the mouse. So there's a certain amount of work which is performed against gravity to lift the mouse. And now within the mouse, there's a certain amount of energy, which is a potential energy. And if I were to let go of the mouse, that potential energy gets transformed into actual motion, which we call kinetic energy. So if that's a very rudimentary way to think about this. But what ibadah does and what worship does is it helps us build that potential energy, right? And that's what the Prophet ﷺ would do. He would stand in the night for so long that his feet would swell, right? That the hydrostatic pressure would push out the water from his vessels into his feet. He would be edematous, but he would keep on praying. And when a person engages in ibadah, when a person engages in the reading of the Quran, whether or not you understand it, there's nur in there. Whether or not you fully get all the tafsir, it doesn't really matter. Just that connection with the Quran, that connection with salah, that connection with dhikr, that builds this potential energy. Because when you do the work of the prophets, you need a very white chest. You need a very white chest. And you have to be like the ocean, that people can dump the garbage of the world in there, but it dissolves it, right? And it doesn't create a wave because it is so vast. I remember myself at one point, it's probably more than a decade ago, I was actually complaining or reporting to one of my mashayikh, one of my teachers, about just how overwhelmed I was. There was so much going on. It was probably sometime in med school or something. And I was married in med school, had kids. There's so many other things going on. And he said, "Look, you're carrying way too much weight." And he said, "You need to stop. You need to take off some things. And you're trying to do Islamic work. You're trying to do this. You're trying to do that." And I told him, "Look, I just can't. I'm not willing to take anything off." And he said, "Well, if you're not willing to take off the weight off your back, then you only have one option. You need to make your back stronger." And so he told me to increase my dhikr. And so this is one of the things that we learn from the seerah. And this is one of the things that you can learn from the revelation order as well. We see that the first revelation was that of Iqra, that read. And so the journey of the Muslim starts with knowledge. And then we have the revelation of Ya ayyuhal muzammil qumil layla illa qalila, entire surah devoted to spiritual purification. وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا, standing in the night in prayer, standing in the Tahajjud Salah. And the reason that this is important is that knowledge for the growth of spirituality. When you don't have a scaffold of knowledge, like knowledge and spirituality are like a body and soul. Both are necessary. But without knowledge, that's where you get all of these bid'at, which are actually rampant in India, less so here in the US, but rampant in India, where you have these wayward Sufis and people making all types of innovations within the deen, is really lack of knowledge. And then the problem on the other side is those people who have just book knowledge, but they're not infused with the spirituality, with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and that also becomes a problem. But when you have knowledge, and when you have spirituality, and then you look at the next revelation, Kim ya ayyuhal mudaththir, qum fa'anthir, you who are wrapped up in garments, stand up and warn, because you need spiritual energy if you're going to go out there and do work and do the khidmah of the deen and carry on the mission of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So that was the third concept I wanted to hit home. That where do you get strength from? The way you get strength from is from your daily five, from going to the masjid, from spending some extra time in dhikr, from getting up in tahajjud, from making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on reforming your own character, because change starts at home first. It's easy to go and preach to all and sundry, but it's very hard to change ourselves and to change our families. We can't ever lose that perspective. When you look at the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, it's nice to sit here and give talks to big audiences and become a big sheikh, this and that, but the real da'wah, sometimes starts at home. And who were the first recipients of the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ were the people who were closest to him: Ali radiallahu an, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala an, so on and so forth. The fourth concept that I'm going to touch on, and before we close, this is sort of, I know we're running up on time here, is that how do you maintain the ability for this long distance run when, that's exactly what it is a marathon. And one of the secrets to this is something that we call ikhlas, or sincerity, or also nasiha, right? To have, it's also sort of another side of the same coin. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, it comes in one narration, he said, ad-dinu nasiha, and this is a sort of an atypical structure in the Arabic language, where both the mubtada, the subject, and the predicate are given in what we call ma'rifah, in the definitive sense. It's an atypical grammatical structure, but it is like the deen is sincerity. If you want to know what the deen is sincerity. And he would actually take a bay'ah. Right? He took a bay'ah from one Sahabi, an-nushu likulli muslimin wa muslimatin, that you to be sincere to every Muslim man and woman. And while it's seminal and it's important, obviously, to have sincerity, before we're sincere to others, we need to be sincere to Allah. Innamal a'malu binniyat. And the reason for this is that when the intention is pure, then the actions become pure. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tayyibun la yaqbalu illa tayyib. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is good, and he doesn't accept that which is good. So when the action becomes good and when the action becomes pure, this attracts the barakah and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It attracts the acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is what preserves actions. For example, and I'll give you just one or two examples. Look at, Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was told and given the order in the Quran, وَأَذِنْ فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ يَأْتُوكَ رِجَالًا وَعَلَى كُلِّ ضَامِرٍ يَأْتِينَ مِنْ كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ, that, give the announcement of the Hajj. There's no one there to listen to an announcement, but he was so sincere in the announcement that he made, telling people to go to Hajj. This is an announcement that has not spanned the entire world to the corners of the earth, and has spanned more than 1400 years. So much so that millions of people respond to that call every single year. And how did that happen? Because he brought an action with sincerity, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he preserved that call. There were many different madhahib. There's the madhab of Ibn Hazm, there's the madhab of Sufyan al-Thawri, there's a madhab of so many different scholars, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved four of the madhahibs, the major madhahibs. And part of the secret, not that the other people were insincere, but it was just due to how pure the founders of many of these madhahibs were. Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Abu Hanifa. Read their biographies. Read about Imam Hanbal and the persecution that he persevered for the sake of the truth, and the humility and the forgiveness that he had in his heart, and how he never flinched from doing the right thing. Read about how he had memorized 1 million ahadith. This great stalwarts and great contributions to the deen didn't happen necessarily because of the capacity and the talents of the individual. It happened because of the acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There have been so many poems, for example, that were written about the Prophet ﷺ, but one of them that stands prominent to this day is the Qasida Burda. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved it because of the sincerity with which the person who wrote it was, of Imam Busayri. So what does that mean? When we're doing work and you're doing khidmah of the deen, one of the operatives that we should always keep in front of us on how to stay sincere is checking our intention time and time again to make sure that we're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our attitude and our mantra should be like the verse in Surah Al-Dahr, لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا, that we don't want any type of recompense from you. ولا شكورا, we don't even want to thank you from you. We don't want anything from you, because all we're looking for is the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what He wants us to do, and that's how I'm going to live my life. And in the same way, you look at our elders, in the same way that we like to be known, where we like our names to be announced, where we want to be in the newspaper, where we want to be the one who's being able to do the work, our elders, the same way that we want our actions to be known, they wanted their actions to be hidden. In fact, they would hide their good deeds the way that we would hide our bad deeds. And so there's a lesson in that if we can infuse وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. This is the secret to the deen, and this is the secret to longevity in doing the work of the deen. That if you remain committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Hayyun Qayyum, He's always going to be there. He's that pillar of strength. He is the source of our strength. And when you attach yourself to the pillar, you allow yourself to glean from that strength so that you can keep on forging forward. So just as a recap, some of the major points that we discussed today, right? The first one is that when we do this work, we realize the first person who benefits from this is ourselves. And so we should be grateful for that, for the opportunity to do this work. The second major concept that we talked about was that we do this work and we do this khidmah and the activism and all of these things and these sacrifices because we care. And the reason that we care is because of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The third thing that we learned is that if we're going to be able to continue to do this work, that it's going to take spiritual energy. It's going to need that potential energy that has to be expressed in our character, in our work, in our changing our communities. But we need to invest in ourselves, in our own spiritual reformation, in correcting the bad habits that we have. Otherwise, those things actually catch up with us and ruin the sincerity and the purity of the work that we're doing. And the last concept when talking about purity is that's one of the ways that you maintain the ability to run the distance run, which is by maintaining sincerity in our actions, doing it only for the sake of Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who are imitators of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, who continue his mission, who imbibe his sunnah, who are able to do so sincerely. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of your actions and preserve you. Wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Husseini, for a wonderful talk and a reminder of our intentions, and reminding us as well that alhamdulillah that we're chosen to be in these positions that we're in beyond just our work, but the fact that we have regular fikr for the world and beyond our necessary needs, but our ideas of service and renewing our intentions of why are we really here, what is our purpose, and the idea of getting it back. Some do it for the thanks, some do it for the likes, some you have to really renew your heart rate and cleanse that over and over. We had 2 questions that came in. So
Sure.
one question was, is it permissible for me to hide my charity and my work from my husband? And another question, I'll put 2 together and then I'll put you back on the screen to answer these questions. How does one keep their intentions sincere perpetually and deal with stress that comes with the social work? As you know, a majority of our attendees today are actual volunteers of IMRC across in India and across Kashmir. And mashallah, they've been doing amazing work year round since COVID started, as well as even extra throughout Ramadan and now post Ramadan. And, it's a reminder as well, how do they keep that balance? So again, one was, is it permissible for me to hide my charity and my work from my husband? And the other one was, how does one keep their intentions sincere perpetually and deal with the stress that comes with social work?
Sure. So to address the first question, is it permissible to hide the charity and the work from the husband? I guess there's a technical answer to that, and then there's from a fiqh perspective, and then there's a practical answer. It would be permissible because if you give in such a way that your right hand doesn't know, your left hand doesn't know what your right hand gave, and that's part of your own self, then much less your husband has to know about the things that you've given. This is something that a person does between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, provided that it's your own money that you're contributing or giving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it probably speaks to some fracture lines which exist within the relationship, because a healthy relationship is predicated on open communication, on transparency, and trust. And obviously that might be lacking, or that there might be different, and sometimes it's because you have tyrannical husbands, sometimes you have controlling husbands, sometimes you have people who don't support the work of the deen. And if it's something really antagonistic like that, then you should take that into account, but you can't let that stifle your progression in your deen and your work of the deen as well, within limits. So I have some very inspiring stories. There's this woman whose husband was very far away from the deen, but she would, and he would actually earn a haram income. And so she would just earn separately from her own self, just so that she could feed her children with a halal rizq. And she really raised very righteous children. So this idea of it's a balance, right? And it takes a certain amount of hikmah. And obviously there's a certain amount, the deen places a tremendous amount of respect and honor for the husband. So if he doesn't want a person to do something within his right, then obviously we don't prioritize something which is nafil over something which is obligatory. So you should defer to that and know to yourself in that situation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the reward of that thing that you were going to do anyway. If you wanted, for example, to go and protest or something, and your husband's like, no, I can't protest, then in that situation, that's fine. Then I don't protest. And that's one of the first ways that you begin to bridge the gap with the husband and engender love, which opens up the door down the line for him to actually support some of these things. Because this is a team effort. You can't do that on your own. But there are times where, like I said, when you have very dictator type husbands who try to get their families to do things which are against the deen, and that is a point where you can draw the line and say that they say La ta'ata li makhluqin fi ma'siyatillah. There is no obedience to creation when it entails a disobedience to Allah So if he's trying to make you do something un-Islamic, then that's when you would sort of take a step back from that. But the other stuff, if it's nafil, then you have to remember that it's nafil and keep it in context, and keep regard for the husband. I think the second question was, how do you deal with the stress that comes? Is that right? With doing all this charity work. And I think it comes back to building this spiritual reserve that you go back to. I mean, you look, for example, there's a narration in which the Prophet ﷺ tells the women to make tasbih on their hands, and and it actually uses the feminine gender in the narration, and you don't have a similar narration about men. And why is that? Right? It gets back to this idea that women are spiritual anchors of the community, and and the world will come to them looking for strength. And if they don't have that strength to give, and that's one of the problems of society, right? That our spiritual reserves are tapped. Since there's nothing there, there's nothing to give. You can't give people something that you don't have. I think that deals with a lot of the stress. The other aspect of that is also knowing when you have to know yourself. And I remember talking to one of my teachers, and he works like I've never hardly seen another person work like that. We'd be working on a project. His wife would have given birth a child in the next room. He says, we have an 11 o'clock meeting. He's going at 11 o'clock. So I learned a lot about work ethic from him, but he would even tell me, he says, if you see signs, let me know, because sometimes we can't see ourselves. And so you have, your body has a right over you, your family has a right over you. And so you have to pace yourself. I can tell you, I regularly make time for my family. I think you have to regularly make time for your work. You have to prioritize your work, your family, and make sure those things the foundations are right. Because if those things are shaken up and you're spending all your time in other things, then it just shakes up the whole mess, right? This is something that has to be sustainable and that you can do on a long-term basis. So, and the Prophet on occasion sometimes he would just disappear. The Sahaba would be looking around for him, and they're like, where is he? And they would find him for example, in a garden by himself. And this is one of the things that I find very powerful, is that resorting sometimes to nature to rejuvenate yourself. There's the beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created even from a psychological perspective, blue and green are very soothing colors. And look at it, the world that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, He created a blue canopy above us in the sky, and He created greenery in the vegetation on the earth. So there's a soothing effect that occurs. Sometimes you do need to take a step back so that you can come back. And when we would be in training, one part of the training is always having a good niyyah to do everything. So what do you do? How do you make a niyyah, for example, just to chill, or just to relax, or to go out for dinner, or to have fun, or not that you're spending all your time in that, but what is the niyyah? And or even to rest. The niyyah that you make is that I want to give my body and myself emotionally, psychologically, spiritually a pause, a rest, so that I can reset, so I can get up tomorrow and then keep on going. And that's actually important. And so that part of that requires us self-awareness and self-monitoring.
Great, Jazakallah khair for answering that. We had another question that came in. Many times our volunteers, as well as across the U.S., they are applicants or people that would come forward saying they're in need of help. And then there is judgment sometimes placed across them. They don't look like a person in need. And this question particularly came from a volunteer in India. And they're saying when they're coming and asking for help, and they know that, as a nonprofit, we are not allowed to judge or criticize. But however, they feel like this person is not being honest. How do they handle that situation? Do they still go ahead and give, or do they deny that to them?
Right. So this actually there's a narration where a person had given some money to his son to distribute, and he distributed, and it was dark, and he distributed on 3 different nights. I don't want to mess up the narration, but the idea here is that if you put it in the hand of people who were not rightful to get that money, but the reward is still there, and that's the beauty of our deen, that when you have your heart in the right place, even sometimes when the actions don't necessarily conform to the rules. It's not about that. It's about doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to do. And so you're right, there's a certain level of trust that needs to exist. However, at the same time, it doesn't mean that you have to be a fool. And there's a certain thing about hikmah, there's a certain thing about common sense. I mean, we've been told in the deen that don't oppress and don't be oppressed. We've also been told that not to be bit from the same hole twice. And so there's a certain, for example, like if you go to the haram, there's a lot of scammers there, and they have pretty much the same story. And so, initially when I was 17, I would just give, even though it sounded very shady. But as you pick up experience, then you begin to realize that, that's not really the intent. So I would tell them in a very polite way that, I wouldn't be able to contribute, whatever the case may be, because it's not an obligation for me to necessarily to give to that particular person. And that's actually been corroborated, has been corroborated by one of the leading muftis, if I'm not mistaken, that in the UK. So I think that there's one of the ways that you can get around that is having a certain level of vetting process when people come. But unless you see any telltale signs that something is amiss, then you can. I mean, the default setting in the deen is that people are honest, and you're innocent until you're proven guilty. So you should give people the benefit of the doubt, unless there's something that entails doubt, right? So I'm going to give you a very practical example. You're not supposed to have a bad conjecture about anybody, but if you're walking in the middle of the night in a really dangerous neighborhood, and a person starts walking up to you in a very threatening way, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, I should have a good opinion about this person. No, you're going to turn around and run the other way and get to safety. And that's just common sense. And that's something that the deen would entail for a person to do. So you can apply some of that same reasoning into these type of situations. But one of the things that we want to sort of refrain from is going too far on the other side. You wouldn't humiliate that person. You wouldn't, you just tell them, it's instead of giving him the sadaqah and saying, look, I know that you're cheating me or hurting their heart, just tell them a good word, like we're not able to help you out or something like that this time, or we need some further verification. And the best thing to do about this is that you're not like racially profiling or something like this, is to have standards set up ahead of time, right? That ahead of time you have sort of protocols to determine if certain triggers happen that it requires additional paperwork or vetting. And this exists in all types of systems and corporate systems anyway. So you could just apply that to this scenario as well, and that wouldn't be contravening a principle in the deen.
We don't have any other questions for today, so I'd like to wrap up our program. Thank you again, Dr. Hosseini, for joining us all the way from Florida, and I'm on the other coast, all the way in California, as well as our other attendees that joined all the way from India and Kashmir and perhaps other places around the world. It's definitely beneficial. I found this myself so practical, just even being a mom and juggling these things and wanting to be involved in school activities, the masjid, and then even your own work, and how to maintain those balances as well as all your other relations and obligations as well. And alhamdulillah, I was taking a lot of notes while you were speaking, and it was, mashallah, wonderful. I plan to sit down with the family and then we can talk about it. But again, a reminder, like, our job is to do the work, and alhamdulillah, Allah has chosen us in these positions to be in. That itself is a blessing that Allah has chosen us. And inshallah, the results are with Allah, right? We make dua that inshallah that Allah put barakah in our work, and inshallah the strength as well. I like the idea where you give the example of you were taking on so much and you were told, and well, you need to stop. You were like, well, I can't. Like, okay, make dua, then your back is stronger. And so inshallah, that's something I'll definitely take away from this. I'd like to ask you to please do a closing dua for us, inshallah, and we'll go ahead and end our program. Jazakallah khair, everyone else, for joining us for our program.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, nahmaduhu wa salli ala rasulihil kareem. Allahumma la nuhsi alayk anta kama athnayta ala nafsik. Allahumma laka ash-shukru kullu wa laka al-hamdu kullu. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad bi'adli man salla wa sama wa bi'adli man qa'ada wa qam. Allahumma ij'alna min khuddami hadhihi ad-din bi rahmatik, min hadha لهذا الدين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم خلص نياتنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم ارزقنا بالاستقامة على دينك يا رب العالمين. Ya Allah, we are your needy servants. Ya Allah, we are your weak servants. Ya Allah, we are fuqara and you are ghani and you are hamid. You have no need for us and we have every need from you, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, we are ever thankful for you and ever humbled by the fact that you have people to pick people who are so unworthy and incapable and undeserving as ourselves to present ourselves to do any aspect and carry on any aspect of the work of your prophets and the work of your deen. Ya Allah, this is one of our greatest honors. This is one of the greatest respect that you have endowed upon us, Ya Allah. But we are too weak for this job, Ya Allah. In the same way that a child, when they're given and commissioned with some job that they cannot take themselves, comes to their parents and asks them for help, Ya Allah, in the same way we return to you, our Lord, our Creator, our Sustainer, our source of power, our source of solace, our Forgiver, and our Lord, Ya Allah, that you give us the strength, and you give us the ikhlas, and you give us the niyyah, and you give us the istiqamah, and you give us the steadfastness, and you give us the vision, Ya Allah, to be able to do this work and to be able to do it in a way that is pleasing to you, Ya Allah, and that is acceptable to you, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, if we do all of this and it is accepted by you, Ya Allah, then it is worthless, Ya Allah. And if we do nothing, and even the smallest thing, and it's accepted with you, then it is more than anything that we can do, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, no matter how much efforts we make, it is small before the Creator of the universe. We are ever so dependent on your mercy, on your acceptance, on your forgiveness, and your forbearance, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, please forgive us for the wrongs that we've done in the past. Ya Allah, please forgive us for the insincerity in our actions. Ya Allah, forgive us for the insincerity in our intentions. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, grant us steadfastness. Grant us the true sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ of truly caring for other people genuinely without any ulterior motives. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, please continue, bless all the people and their families who are doing the work of the deen. Ya Allah, reward their families for their sacrifices, reward the workers for their sacrifices, and give them the commitment and the motivation and the reward that will keep them moving in a way that is pleasing to you. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khair, everyone. Thank you again for joining our program. Inshallah, may Allah put barakah in all of your efforts and intentions and bless you and your families always. Assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام.